Hello everyone, welcome back. Now, in the last lecture series, or the set of lectures, or videocasts, we looked at an Andean ethnic group called or a number of ethnic groups that came together collectively under the Huarochirí cosmovision. So we're in the Andean region. We're going to stay in the Andes for this set of videocasts. And we're going to look in more detail at the Incas and the Inca Empire, known as Tawantinsuyo, or as they referred to it. This first videocast, though, is going to be a bit of a head mess. Deliberately, I'm going to do this. I'm going to give you a linguistic approach to historical thinking. Now, I've been banging on for the past few weeks about cycles and cyclical history, and you're probably wishing I'd stopped mentioning it. Well, hopefully this linguistic variant of that will give you another idea of how differently the world can be perceived and how differently cosmovisions can be constructed by something as simple as language differences. Well, actually, I say simple, it's not simple at all, but it's something as, I suppose, common to us, every day to us, as something that language we use all the time. But as soon as you introduce differences into language structures, that creates a whole new way of conceiving the world. In the videocasts that follow on, I'll move on to discuss the Inca specifically, and we'll be covering how cosmological traits that arguably were common to various peoples in the southern and central Andes became caught up, or rather intertwined, with a state cult that not only sustained a rationale for empire, but which arguably necessitated exponential expansion. So in a similar way, perhaps, to the Mexica or Aztec state cult in central Mesoamerica. Well, it played out differently, as you'll see. Okay. But in this session, we'll make a linguistic foray into the history of the Andes. Now, the language of the central to southern Andean highlands is Quechua, or more to the point, that's the language that became the lingua franca of the Inca Empire, or even more specifically, the elite of the Inca Empire. And just as an aside, you might actually be surprised to hear that lingua franca for evangelization by Spanish priests during the colonial period was also Quechua, and it increased Quechua use throughout the Andes, which again, that's just as an aside. Anyway, Quechua is one of the many languages in the world that uses root words, then suffixes and prefixes to change the meaning of the word. Now, here's a particular example relating to cosmovision. So if you have take the word or the root nyaupak, it's a spatial term. It refers to something spatial. It means something that is in front of you. Nyaupak, something that is in front of you. But it also refers to something temporal. So it's both spatial and temporal. And that, if you think of it in a temporal context, it means before, or something in the past. Yeah, so you've got the spatial meaning, which is something that is in front of you, and you've got the temporal meaning, which is something that's taken place before. So, just as an example, nyaupak pacha, you've got before time or prehistory. Again, pacha itself is a term meaning earth, so it's both spatial, and it's also temporal because it means time. Nyaupak pacha, before time, it's prehistory. But if you add the suffix pi, to the end of the root nyaupak, it means in front. It becomes entirely spatial. Yeah? If you add the suffix ta, to the root nyaupak, it becomes nyaupakta, which means before or earlier on. So yeah, you've got something that's either in front of you or something that happened before. And in fact, the root itself, Nyaupak, comes from or is derived from another word meaning I, Nyaui. So you can possibly work out where I'm going with this. You can see the link between the notion of something that you can see and something that's happened. So something you can see in front of you and something that's already happened. So you might be thinking, okay, what on earth is my point? Well, if we compare it to Western European culture that looks into the future, and you might argue blindly, because we don't really know what the future is going to hold. We can guess, but we don't know. Quechua speakers conceptually look into the past and see the past as stretching out before them. So the result of that is that they actually understand the present pretty well, and the continuity from the past to the present. The converse point is that Westerners don't understand their own present because they've got no memory. They can't see the past. So in effect, they're always looking into the future, what's to come and what's not happened. Now, in actual fact, earlier on, so in early modern times, so the 16th centuries, in medieval times before then, going right back to, I guess, early Christianity, Western Europeans, thanks to revelation, knew what would happen at the end of days, at the end of time. That's the apocalypse and the second coming. And they knew that they had to work towards that. So this is a linear history, and they just had to fill in the gaps between the now and what they knew would happen in the future. But there's a whole line of stuff that hasn't happened, and that they don't necessarily know how it's going to play out. If you give it a secular perspective, you remove revelation completely, because revelation doesn't exist from a secular perspective, and so Western Europeans are kind of left drifting into the unknown. We can't ever know what the future holds, so we're blind in three ways, because we're not looking at the past, so we don't understand the present, and we can't see into the future. So Western Europeans are screwed. Quechua speakers, however, they see or live the past in the present, so they understand it. The future unfolds as part of the past and the present, and this ties into a further advantage, of course, which is that indigenous time is cyclical. It's the same concept in the Andes as it is in Mesoamerica, the fact that it's cyclical. By knowing their past, Andeans could also know their future, or at least recognize it as it unfolds. And I'll give you some more linguistic examples so you can see how this is borne out. So, we've got a phrase from Quechua, Paikuna chakra richkaiku, which literally translates as, we are going to the fields. But in this little phrase there's a huge difference in worldview, because in Western European languages, simple present tenses can also be used for the near future. So, for example, we are going to the fields in English, or in Spanish if you like, vamos al campo, could mean that we're going to the fields right now, or we're going to the fields tomorrow or later. Vamos al campo mañana, más tarde. It's the near, so it can also mean the near future. Conversely, in Quechua, simple present tenses are used for the present and the near past. So, we are going to the fields could mean we went to the fields earlier. What it can't mean is the near future, because there are other ways of talking about the future. So similarly, when you've got phrases about the past, in Quechua, there's another phrase, Huayna kaspa sikuyapi tiyakuk kani, which translates roughly as, when I was a boy or an adolescent, I used to live in Sikuya. I didn't actually, I lived in Liverpool, so it would be Huayna kaspa Liverpoolpi tiyakuk kani. When I was a boy, adolescent, I used to live in Liverpool. But if you literally translate it, it renders as boy being in Sikuya, that's Sikuyapi, I am one who lives. I am one who lives in Sikuya. So in English this would be a present tense, but in Quechua it's a past tense, meaning I used to live in Sikuya. In historical narratives or stories of a more distant past, you've got a specific past tense used to set the scene, and then it's dropped. So once the scene's set, it's dropped as the narrative reverts to the use of the present tense, but still referring to the past. So, what am I saying here? I'm saying that in the Andean cosmovision, the past and the present, or for Quechua speakers, the past and the present were and are intimately linked. Hopefully that hasn't confused you completely and utterly, but it might help you think about the origin myths and the stories and memories of Inca origins and Andean origins in a slightly different way to the way you're thinking of it up to now. Anyway, you don't need to remember all this. You don't need to remember the phrases. I'm not going to test you on the phrases. I just want to get the point across that conceptually, for Andeans, the past and the present are much more intimately linked. They are seen than in Western European cosmovisions, or not cosmovisions so much as reality, where we're constantly looking into a future which we can't see, and we forget the past because we're not that interested. Well, hopefully you as historians are, but yeah, generally speaking. So there's a big difference in the way we conceive and perceive the world around us. So that's where I'll leave the first foray into linguistic historical analysis.